So we will be putting up the video at our website where you can watch it at a future time. And so my name is Francis Hua. I'm the program chair for the SIG, and I'm very happy to have my longtime friend and colleague Dr. Dewey Cornell, present this topic for us on why our schools need behavior threat assessment. Now, Dewey, you gave this presentation here actually at Missouri a few years ago at our prevention science seminar. And actually, the students and faculty at that seminar are also attending this talk of yours too. So it works out well. So for those on the East Coast, thank you for joining us during your lunch break. I know that's a valuable time. So uh, so for the format for this webinar, we'll have Dewey present for around 40 to 45 minutes. And then if you have questions that you would like to ask, you can use the Q&A button that should be available on your Zoom's panel, and then you can just ask it. Or if you would like to ask it in person, let me know and I can mute you, I guess, and if you want to ask the question directly to our presenter. So our presenter is Dr. Dewey Cornell, who has been a professor at the University of Virginia for many decades. And but he's still quite young. But so Dewey is a forensic and clinical psychologist, and he's the director of the Youth Violence Prevention Lab. What he, among other things, is also the primary author, the principal author for the authoritative school climate survey. Since it's a school climate SIG, I should mention that it's not in his bio here, but the authoritative school climate survey is a very popular survey that has been used, and we still continue to use that too to measure school climate. Now, Dewey has been doing this for several years. And he has authored numerous articles. He has over 300 publications in psychology education and covering topics related to school climate, safety, bullying, and of course, threat assessment. Recently, Dewey was honored with the Outstanding Contributor in Threat Assessment Research by the Association for Threat Assessment Professionals. And so we're delighted to have Dewey here to give us this presentation on behavioral threat assessment. So I will now turn it over to Dewey, and I will stop sharing this slide. Well, now if I can figure out how to stop sharing it there. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Francis. Very kind and overly long introduction. Greetings to those who've heard some of this before, although I've updated a little bit, and hopefully you'll find something new and valuable in it. So you can see my screen now, Francis? Okay, I couldn't hear you, but I think you're muted. So anyway,
I can see it.
Great. All right. So welcome, everyone. I'm going to talk about why our schools need behavioral threat assessment and a little bit about how it works and how we know it works. And there are copies of these slides that will be available in a PDF. Maybe Francis could post them on the website, or you can, of course, contact me and I'd be happy to send you a copy. So what is threat assessment? Why do we need it? How does it work? How do we know that it works? And so let's talk about, first of all, threat assessment. How often do schools do threat assessment? Well, it kind of depends on what you mean by the term threat assessment. It sounds like a strange term and kind of a new thing, but it's really not as unusual as it maybe sounds. When we have a student who's angry or upset or who says something unexpected in class, Well, we all respond with, trying to assess that person, what's going on with them. And we might not call it a threat assessment, but actually it is a threat assessment. And, you're probably doing a threat assessment right now. You looked at this girl and you noticed her facial expression and her posture. And if she was a student in your class, you would be reviewing what you know about her, how she's behaved recently, and trying to understand what's going on with her and what should you do next. And so really the question for me is, do we do this subjectively, intuitively, on the fly, or are there circumstances where we need to do it more objectively and systematically? And in schools that do not have a formal threat assessment process, what they're often doing is basically a kind of zero tolerance approach. That is, they'll automatically remove that student from school because of some concern about potential violence, regardless of the seriousness or the context of the behavior. And we know from a number of studies that removing a student from school doesn't improve the safety of the school. It doesn't benefit the student or improve their behavior. And we've had many cases of school shootings where suspension and even expulsion had been used without success. What we really want to do when we're concerned about a student is, through a threat assessment process, figure out how we can supervise, teach, and support that student to move them off a path of violence. Now, we have to make discriminations between threats that are serious and not serious, because we see lots of threats in schools that are not serious. This is my favorite and worst example. This little boy chewed his Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. I hope none of you all are having a Pop-Tart for lunch today, but if you are, be careful. Don't chew it into the shape of a gun. You could be identified as bringing a gun to school. And this little boy was suspended from school because the school had zero tolerance for firearms. And under that school's zero tolerance policy, a toy gun or a look-alike, it's a stretch to call this a look-alike, but a look-alike weapon would be treated the same. If the school had had a threat assessment process, they could have saved themselves months and months of court hearings and debates and acrimony. The threat assessment team, of course, would have said, well, a Pop-Tart is not really dangerous. He wasn't really threatening anybody. Nobody was in danger. In fact, the only thing dangerous about a Pop-Tart is if you eat it. So we could have handled that case much more simply. So really the formal process is called Behavioral Threat Assessment and Management, or BTAM. Now that's a mouthful, so people often just call it threat assessment, but that's a little bit of an oversimplification. There are, in the BTAM world, three processes or three stages or phases of threat assessment. The first stage is identification. That is, someone is concerned, reports a concern. This might be a student, a friend, a family member, a teacher, concerned about something that someone said or did that suggested potential threat of violence. And of course, we want a school climate, we want a school culture in which people are willing to report concerns about violence. They don't see it as snitching, they see it as seeking help. There's a lot of research on that topic alone, but it's really critical and essential in order for threat assessment to take place. The second phase of the threat assessment process is, once a concern has been reported, that you have a multidisciplinary team that is going to investigate. They're going to gather information from multiple sources and try to determine how serious the threat is. And then, based on that assessment, they'll move to the third phase, which is intervention. Now, if the threat is really serious, they're probably going to take protective action. They might even contact law enforcement, things like that. But in many cases, what they will identify is maybe a need for conflict resolution or education or counseling. There's a whole range of possible responses at the intervention stage. All right, so that's the answer, my short answer to the first question of what behavioral threat assessment is. And let me now move to the second question as to why we need it. Well, maybe that seems like an obvious question. We need it because we've had school shootings, and school shootings have had a very traumatic impact on our schools, on educators, on students and parents. And we've spent billions of dollars on school security measures, and we've developed this perception that schools are not safe places. And there's a lot more I could say about that. But let me at least mention that school shootings, as terrible as they are, and we should never have even a single school shooting, they are not as frequent as they seem. In 2024, we had 22 schools where a shooting homicide took place. Obviously, we don't want any, but 22 schools out of 130,000 schools in the United States means that the average school had a shooting about every 6,000 years. Statistically, and I can elaborate on this statistically, schools are one of the safest places in our community. Kids are safer from a shooting in a school than they are if they're in a restaurant, a store, a parking lot, or at home. So schools are much safer than it seems. But the problem is not just school shootings, it's really threats. And we don't have many school shootings actually in our schools, but we have lots of threats, lots of students who say or do things that suggest a threat. So a big problem is that we've got lots of students being arrested, suspended, or expelled for making threats. And so if you're working in a school, and of course you want to prevent a school shooting, but most of the students that you're going to see don't pose a serious threat. That is, they don't have the real intent or the capability to carry out a shooting, but they may be making threats that raise a lot of concern. And there's reasons for those threats. These students may be angry at something. They may have a grievance. They may be frustrated with something that's going on. They may actually want to get into a fight, not to shoot somebody, but if they're a fifth grader, seventh grader, eighth grader, some of these kids get into physical fights. We have kids who make threats because they're joking or they want to seek attention in some way. And we have threats that are falsely reported. We have kids who will make up a threat. Someone will make up a threat that, Francis is going to shoot up the school. And pretty soon Francis is in trouble and he's pulled into the office and his parents are called. And I know of cases where folks will get suspended from school because somebody else made up a threat that they didn't make. So threat assessment is very important, even though school shootings are rare. There are two kinds of mistakes that you can make in threat assessment. Maybe that's good that there's only two kinds, but they are overreaction and underreaction. Overreaction is there on the left. You've got kids who, this kid brought a tiny piece of plastic to school and he was suspended for 1 year. He was expelled for 1 full year because it violated the school's zero tolerance policy. We also have cases of underreaction, which we're all definitely want to avoid, where a child brought a gun to school or made some other kind of threat of violence that was serious, and the school dismissed the threat or did not follow up with an appropriate threat assessment. So many states now, though, have learned about threat assessment, have passed legislation either requiring or recommending or encouraging threat assessment. Most states have some kind of school threat assessment language. And the NCS reports that 85% of schools in the United States, 85%, report that they have a threat assessment team. Now, this doesn't tell us what kind of threat assessment team or how well they're doing or whether it's an evidence-based program, but it's on the radar screen of schools that they ought to have somebody doing a threat assessment. So that's progress. And there are resources for schools to do threat assessment, to develop it. The National Center for School Safety at the University of Michigan, we at the University of Virginia are affiliated with the National Center, and we co-authored a school threat assessment toolkit which was designed specifically to help grant recipients, stop grant recipients, and others, all schools really, who want to set up a threat assessment program. Let me also mention that there are new national technical standards for school security approved by the National Standards Institute. These were approved actually just last August, so this is pretty recent. And these standards, which are voluminous, actually now for the first time say that one of the school security standards for the United States is to have a threat assessment program. And there are 12 pages describing these standards. I served on the Technical Standards Committee and helped author these standards. And they're not required by schools, but they are recommended, and they are a source of liability protection for schools to meet national standards for school security. So you might talk with your school security experts about that. All right, so that is my quick answer to why we need behavioral threat assessment. And I'm now going to talk about how does it work. And of course, there are different kinds of threat assessment models that have been developed. I'm going to talk about the one that my colleagues and I developed at the University of Virginia, in which school-based teams, multidisciplinary teams, will gather information when a threat has been reported, follow a 5-step decision tree to decide whether the threat is serious or not so serious. And I'll say a little bit about the classification of seriousness, but obviously if it's serious, we'll take protective action and we'll try to resolve what other problem underlies the threat. We emphasize using a multidisciplinary team. Threat assessment should not be assigned to the school psychologist, the school counselor, or the assistant principal, or the social worker, or one person. It's too much responsibility, and the process really benefits from having multiple people involved in gathering information and undertaking interventions. We recommend that every school have its own team so that they can respond quickly. They will know the students. They will be able to monitor what's going on. And we found that a school-based team can handle almost all of the cases. Now, I know some districts have a community team or a district level team, which is fine. They can be involved in the more serious cases, but no lone rangers in threat assessment. Well, we have a well-structured process, semi-structured process with a number of forms that are freely available. You can go to this website and download them. Let me emphasize, you don't fill out every form for every case. That would be too laborious for schools and not be efficient or productive. We have a manual. This is a manualized process. Our new manual is 180 pages. It will walk you through the threat assessment process, give you lots of different examples, and help you implement the program along with training that can be provided. So what you learn is a 5-step process to gather information and make an appropriate response. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this 5-step process. It really begins with maybe an interview. Now, in most cases, you'll want to interview maybe the student who's identified as making a threat, probably the person who's been threatened, maybe witnesses. And so we have kind of a basic set of questions to start with. Now, you may, of course, vary these questions according to the situation, but we really want to know, what happened, what did you say and do, what did you mean when you said that? Now, all these are open-ended questions. We don't want to give leading questions. We don't want to be accusatory. But what do you think the person thinks about what you said or did? And what was the reason you said that? And what are you going to do now? And I'm going to give you some examples of how this interview works in practice. But the idea is to sort cases into 4 categories. There are 4 possible responses. Number 1, you might decide that the incident that's reported to you is really not a threat. Maybe it's a false rumor. You might decide that, yes, a threat was made, but it wasn't serious. The child was just, expressing themselves. Oh, I could shoot you for that. Or, oh, I'd like to blow this place up. Or they're frustrated, but they have no serious intent. Or maybe they're just joking and people took it seriously. But it's most cases we're going to find are transient threats. Now, on the other hand, if we cannot resolve a threat to our level of satisfaction, that the team is comfortable that, no, it's not serious, if they have concern that it is serious, we will treat the threat as substantive, meaning it has substance. So the first level of a substantive threat is that the kid wants to fight somebody. And we have kids at all grade levels, but particularly in middle grades, who do get into physical fights, and often they will telegraph that intention with a threat. On the other hand, if it's more than a fight, if it's an intent to shoot somebody, stab, kill, severely injure somebody, we call that a very serious substantive threat. All right, let me give you some examples of the different types of threats, and then I'll quiz you and see if you can classify the threat. And of course, these are cases for instructive purposes. There's lots of variations, but let's talk about this case. So you're working in a school, maybe you're a counselor or administrator, and they come to your office and they say, "Oh my gosh, two students were in the library, and Ben said he was going to kill another student named Caleb."
Ben, what happened today in the hallway after lunch?
I don't know what you mean.
I heard there was something going on between you and Caleb.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Come on, Ben. Other people were there. Do you want me to take their word for it, or do you want to tell me your side of the story?
What story are you talking about?
I heard that you told Caleb you were going to kill him.
What? Who said that? We were just talking about Fortnite.
Fortnite?
You know, the game. You play online? All the players try to fight each other? It's kill or be killed. And you win by killing everybody else.
What exactly did you say to Caleb?
Well, he killed me last night, so I told him next time I'm gonna kill him. Man, who told you I was gonna kill him? That's absolutely insane.
Okay. I'm going to talk to Caleb and see what he says.
Please do. And talk to the other guys that were with us.
All right. Give me their names.
Okay, let's what we found out is they were just talking about a video game, and lots of video games have violent content and involve violent language. In the happy event that this is your case at your school, how are you going to classify this threat? Well, this is a tough one. It's not a threat. It was a misunderstanding, and under our decision tree, we will resolve this case at step 1. Now, there may be some things to do. There may be rumors spreading that we need to quell. And of course, we're going to talk with other people and make sure that we all agree that this was not a serious threat. But assuming that occurs, we will classify it as not a threat. But let's imagine this conversation goes a little differently. Let's see what happens in this situation.
Ben, what happened today in the hallway after lunch?
I don't know what you mean.
I heard there's something going on between you and Caleb.
Caleb? What did you hear?
I want to know from you what you said.
He's been acting like a jerk, so I told him I was sick of it. That's all.
What did Caleb do that was acting like a jerk?
My friends and I played some basketball with Caleb and his friends. Caleb's a big trash talker, and they beat us. And for some reason, Caleb can't shut up about it.
So how did you respond?
Just told him we were going to beat them next time.
That's all you said?
Yeah, basically. I just said, you better watch out. We're going to beat you next time.
That's not exactly what I heard.
What did you hear?
I heard that you were going to kill him.
No, not kill him. Just beat him in the game. I was mad at him, but I'm not actually going to kill him. It's so messed up.
How do you think Caleb took it?
He just laughed and said, bring it on, man. He knew what I meant. He didn't say something different, did he?
I didn't hear it from him.
You should talk to him and the other guys who are with us.
I will. What are their names?
All right. All right. So basically, Ben is just angry. This was trash talking following the basketball game, and he's angry, and so he said, I'm going to kill you, but he didn't mean kill. And so here's another difficult one. What kind of threat is this? Well, it's a transient threat. That is, there was not a serious intent or an intent that extends beyond the passion of the moment. And of course, we will resolve it as a transient threat, not just based on one interview, but information that we gathered from multiple sources. We're going to look at Ben's record, and if Ben has a history of fighting people or other violence, we may discount what he's saying. But assuming that we're comfortable that this is exactly what happened and that Ben isn't seriously trying to do physical harm to somebody else, it will be a transient threat. All right. The big difference is between transient threats and substantive threats. And a substantive threat means we think there's some serious intent, and therefore we're going to take protective action, like supervising the students, contacting their parents, maybe trying to resolve or mediate the dispute in some way. And so this is why we make this distinction between transient and substantive threats. Let me give you now an example that gets a little bit more serious.
Okay. You told me Caleb is a big trash talker who keeps making a big deal that he beat you in basketball. What did you say?
Okay, look. I said, keep it up. I'm going to kill you.
What did you mean when you said that?
I was mad at him. He's a jerk and needs to shut up. I was just trying to shut him up. I'm not going to kill him if that's what you're asking.
How do you think Caleb feels about what you said?
I don't really care how he feels.
Well, what's the reason that you said that?
I hope he gets the message and backs off.
What if he doesn't?
When there's going to be a fight. He's asking for it, and I'm not putting up with his stuff anymore.
I see. What are you going to do now?
That's up to him. He knows I've had it.
All right. If you are a middle school counselor, you've probably had this conversation a few times. And really at any grade level, we deal with students who want to fight someone. And but it doesn't appear to be more than a fight. Certainly a fight is concerning, and we don't want that to happen. This is something we would classify as a very serious, or as a serious substantive threat. Serious means a fight is involved. A simple assault as opposed to an aggravated assault or a felonious assault that would involve a lethal weapon and serious injury. And these cases are resolved at step 3. We're probably going to try to mediate the conflict. We're going to contact parents. There are a number of things on our checklist that we're going to consider as appropriate to the situation to prevent the fight from being carried out. On the other hand, if it is more than a fight, something that we might consider a felonious act, we will go further than just simply trying to prevent it from being carried out. We will do a more extensive assessment, and we will conduct or develop a more comprehensive safety plan. And there's quite a bit more to be said about that, but let me give you a quick example. Here we go.
Ben, what happened today in the hallway after lunch?
Don't know what you mean.
I heard there was something going on between you and Caleb.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Come on, Ben. Other people were there. Do you want me to take their word for it, or do you want to tell me your side of the story?
Who's snitching on me?
Nobody's snitching on you. I think people are just concerned about what's going on between you and Caleb.
Well, it's nobody's business.
And my priority is keeping everybody in the school safe. And if there's a problem between you and Caleb, I want to know more about it.
That's between me and Caleb.
Did you tell him that you were going to kill him?
I'm not going to talk about my private business.
All right, maybe some of you have had those kinds of conversations as well. We know that students aren't always forthcoming or truthful with us, and we have to rely on secondary sources of information. And in this particular case, the school resource officer tells us that Ben and Caleb belong to rival gangs. He also knows from other students that Ben is rumored to have a gun. So this is not a situation that we can easily resolve or dismiss. And this will be a good example of a very serious substantive threat. And these are the cases where we're going to use all 5 steps of our decision tree. We're going to do a much more comprehensive assessment and develop a safety plan. It probably will continue over time to prevent an act of violence. And in these cases, we have a much more extensive safety interview. We will interview parents and witnesses, school staff. We will involve law enforcement. They will probably search for weapons, certainly share with us their advice and consultation. Lots of different possibilities here. But these are the cases that are going to require a more detailed assessment and then develop a safety plan. And this will be documented. Team members will be assigned different roles, and then there will be an ongoing process. So you might be wondering, well, how does this work in practice? So these 4 types of cases, from a recent sample of 22,000 cases that we collected in a study in Florida of about 3,400 schools, we found that 11% of the cases were resolved as not a threat. We found that about 71% were transient. So this means that about 80% of the threats that come forward to a threat assessment team, about 80% are resolved as not serious. If we had to do a comprehensive threat assessment on every one of these cases, and I've seen schools that try to do this with different systems, it's too laborious, it's too time consuming, and they end up not doing their threat assessments. And we've seen cases like that that have gone badly. So it's very helpful to have a process that can at least reduce the workload and focus our time and energy on the substantive threats. And about, well, in this sample, 13% involved a fight, 5% were very serious. Typically about 5% of threats are very serious. Now this will be a little bit higher in middle school, a little bit lower in elementary school. Some schools, of course, will differ across schools as well. All right, that's how it works in a nutshell. We do a very lengthy training program, about 6.5 hours of training. We have the manual, the forms, and so forth. And I've given you just a little synopsis of it. But how do we know that this works? How do we know that this works? Well, we want schools to use evidence-based practices, and that term gets bandied about a lot. But what I mean by evidence-based practice means that it's been tested with scientific studies, and that studies have objective results that demonstrate that it works. And the CSTAG model is one that has been extensively tested with articles published in a variety of peer-reviewed journals. Thanks in large part to my research team, including Francis, who has been a great colleague and methodologist on many of these articles. Here's our top 20 studies. I think I've got 20 minutes left. I'll go through each study one at a time, and that will take us to the end of the time, right? Everybody want to hear 20 studies summarized? Probably not. Only Francis would want that. But we've done field tests, we've done training evaluations to show how effective our training is, and then we've done controlled studies in which schools using our model are compared to comparison groups. We've done large-scale implementation studies. Currently, we're doing a study across 6 states, looking at the fidelity of implementation and long-term outcomes for students. So there's a lot to summarize. I'd be happy to send you copies of any of our articles. Let me just say, in terms of safety outcomes, we've had thousands of threats across multiple states. Very few threats have resulted in some type of violence, and 99% of the threats resulted in no serious injuries. It's on the order of about 0.5% that have had some kind of serious injury, and by that I mean a broken bone or a concussion. We have had no shootings in any of these cases, no fatalities, and no stabbings, other than stabbing somebody with a pencil in a couple of cases. We've also shown in our controlled studies reductions in bullying and peer aggression. And we found, using our school climate survey, that students and teachers report a more positive school climate with less fighting when schools are using our model. And the longer they've used it, the stronger the results. In terms of injuries following student threats, a sample of about 9,800 cases that had data on attack outcomes found that actually about 5% of the time, some kind of physical assault took place. And of that, less than 0.5%, 0.4% in this particular study had some type of serious injury. In terms of outcomes for the students who made the threat, most of them are referred for some kind of support services, such as counseling. Almost all of the students remain in school, in their school. There are some short-term suspensions, but they typically return to their school about 90% of the time. In terms of racial disparities, I'll show you some slides on that in just a minute. We certainly want our threat assessment process to be fair and equitable. And what we find is that the racial disparities are markedly reduced, if not eliminated, in cases involving a threat assessment. And we also find that very few students are subject to arrest, court charges, or incarceration. The most recent evidence that we have from this is that study that I alluded to in Florida, where we gathered data from 60 of 67 districts, 3,400 schools, about 23,000 cases. And we're publishing a series of articles from this database. And here's the breakdown across grades. This is very similar to what we've seen in Virginia. That is that there is a distribution that peaks in the middle grades. And you'll see that the blue bars are the transient threats. Most threats are transient. The gray bars are not a threat. So together, the blue and the gray are threats that are resolved fairly easily, although they do require some intervention. The yellow are the fights, the serious substantive threats, and the little red band at the top are the very serious threats. Let me just say, in terms of disciplinary and legal outcomes for these cases, about 26% had a short-term out-of-school suspension. This is much lower than if the school used a zero-tolerance approach, in which they would be suspending almost all of these students. In terms of placement change, movement to a different school, about 10% of the students moved to a different school, maybe an alternative school. Fewer than 2% were expelled, 1.7. And in terms of law enforcement formal actions, less than 1% were arrested. Now, this is important because there is a lot of concern, a lot that has been written claiming that threat assessment will become a way for schools to be criminalizing their students, that law enforcement will come into the schools and arrest a lot of students. And we are seeing in the news students being arrested for making threats, often I think threats that are probably transient under our classification system. But this is what happens, I think, when you don't use threat assessment, when you don't have law enforcement trained and working as part of the school team. Because when law enforcement is involved in all of these cases, when we have law enforcement trained as part of the threat assessment team, we have a very low rate of arrest, court charges, or incarceration. So there's a lot to be said about the role of law enforcement in schools, but I think it can be done safely and effectively. And, you know, this is related to a broader concern about fairness and equity. We want a process that is going to be fair. We want a process that's going to be equitable for all students. And we have done repeated studies looking at fairness and equity. And again, I'll select the Florida results, but the Florida results are very consistent with what we found in Virginia and what we're finding in other states, which is that suspension rates, removal rates are largely equitable. There are some small percentage differences. A few of them are statistically significant, but when you control for family income and threat classification and other variables, they're even smaller. And some of our results using Bayesian analysis show that, in fact, students were treated equal across racial groups, family income groups, and disability. And I think I've got a disability slide up here. These are students with an IEP, with or without an IEP. And as you know, there's a lot of concern about students with an IEP or students with disabilities generally being suspended or disciplined at a high rate. And again, there have been concerns raised that threat assessment would magnify or at least perpetuate these disparities, because students with disabilities, you know, some of them do engage in threats at an elevated rate. We do see a number of kids with disabilities referred for a threat assessment. Think about kids with ADHD or with emotional behavioral problems. They might well make threatening statements, and we would rather that they went for a threat assessment than go to the principal's office where they're going to be disciplined. And so what we have found is that when students receive a threat assessment, there are no disparities in disciplinary and legal outcomes. We've looked at other outcomes as well and show parity, lack of disparity in referral for services and academic outcomes. Threat assessment really is a way to divert kids with disabilities and kids from disadvantaged groups into a system that results in more equitable treatment. Okay, I'm going to be asking for questions in just a minute. Let me conclude with my favorite slide, which is a slide of my research team. This is actually from a couple of years ago. Francis is in this picture, and I've been fortunate to work with a lot of very fine graduate students and colleagues over the years, and they have all contributed to this body of research. So the 4 questions that I ask, the answers are: number 1, a behavioral threat assessment is a violence prevention strategy. It gives us a way to have a proportional response rather than overreacting or underreacting. Teams can use it efficiently. We've tested that and found that to be the case. And we have scientific evidence that it works. All right, that's my presentation. I know we've got some time for questions. I would be happy to have verbal questions if you want to sing out, or if Francis has questions, or if you have questions in the chat, any of those would be fine.
Well, thanks so much, Dewey, for that presentation. That's clarified a lot of things about threat assessment. One question that did come up was that earlier on you had mentioned that 85% of schools are using some type of threat assessment. Now, how would you classify, what do we know? What type of threat assessments schools are using? Or, how many different kinds are there?
Well, I met with the NCES committee before they did that survey. I suggested a number of additional questions that weren't included. So we really don't know what model they're using. Many schools, however, invent their own model, or they kind of take a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I'm very cautious about that. Our controlled studies found that that was not such a good idea. And so I would be very cautious that folks invent their own model. There are also some other models. The National Threat Assessment Center has some guidelines for a model. The Salem-Kaiser Cascade model, which was developed by a school psychologist in Washington or Oregon, is another widely used model. So there are a number of widely used models. But most schools, I think, are kind of winging it, and I don't think that's a good idea.
Okay. Another question here, another comment here was, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned currently studying fidelity and earlier mentioned different levels or degrees of implementation of CSTAG in schools. What are some findings or anecdotal things that you've seen on org structures in rural and or under-resourced schools for increasing implementation and success?
Yeah. So this question comes up a lot. We have implemented CSTAG in a lot of rural schools, Maine, Florida, Kentucky, the Dakotas, a lot of schools that have less densely populated areas. Certainly they have fewer resources. They have fewer counselors, social workers, psychologists. But that does not mean that they cannot use a threat assessment approach. They have to adapt it to the resources that they have available. They might have smaller teams, but our results have found comparable results across. We always look at the school's demographics, their size, their region, their proportion of low-income students. And what we have found pretty consistently is that CSTAG works across those different types of schools. Every school is going to have to deal with their resource problem, and that's a national problem. Urban schools have this too. They are often understaffed in student support services relative to their population. So this is a larger problem. It affects everybody's program, everybody's educational services. I'd love to be able to resolve that. But I have to say, threat assessment, though, makes it easier because it gives them a standard way to respond when one of these comes up. And they can be kind of a crisis for a school. So having a standard way to process it is especially helpful if you're understaffed.
Okay. A follow-up question to that would be, do you have CSTAG online tools? And if so, where can we avail of those?
Okay. So the forms are freely available to download. There's a website for training, that's schoolta.com, where you can find out about our training program. We have in-person and online training available. All the research and articles are on the University of Virginia's website. You can Google me and get to that website. It's a harder URL to follow. We also have some free videos on YouTube that explain what threat assessment is. We have videos for parents, teachers, and students on why threat assessment should be used. So there's a lot of different resources available, but the full day training program, which is about 6.5 hours, that's delivered by a paid trainer. And there's an online training program that is marketed by an independent company, and there's a fee for that as well. Many schools have gotten stop school violence grants, including in Missouri, and they've used federal funding to implement that. We also have a train the trainer program so that school districts can have their own trainer to provide CSTAG over time.
And what is the website again you mentioned earlier?
For training, it's schoolta.com. For the University of Virginia, it's longer, but if you Google Youth Violence Project Threat Assessment, my name, you'll get there.
Okay, great. There's another question here about the distribution of threats at the different grade levels.
Yes.
It's interesting to see the sharp decline in overall threats from 11th and 12th grade.
Yes.
Any idea of what is at play there?
Yeah, this is very consistent. And if you look at discipline records for high schools, you will see that ninth graders have by far the most office referrals for disciplinary problems. It drops off in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And so I think what we're seeing with threat assessments is consistent with what we see for misbehavior in general. I think there's maturation. And after ninth grade, kids are increasingly mature and able to control themselves. Now, there is a dropout rate, so there is some selection. There's a couple of percentage of students fewer in the school in each of those grades. That doesn't account for the magnitude of the drop-off, however. I think it's primarily maturation and judgment. And I think our ninth graders are still at the point where they're saying and doing things they need to think more carefully about before they act.
A related question to that would be, is this something that you can also implement in a preschool setting?
Yeah. We actually have preschool implementation. This is primarily for kids who are fighting, pushing, shoving, and threatening other kids. But it really just is a way to sort of say, okay, we need to look at what this child is doing and come up with a behavior plan, consult with the parents. But yes, threat assessment is used at pre-K as well.
So that's
All
possible.
of this has to be modified to the grade, to the developmental level, to the cultural and social background of the student to understand the significance of their behavior.
Okay, great. Another question, and for those who are online still, you can also type in more questions, or we still have a few minutes left, and you can also ask if you wanted to just ask something directly. I can unmute you. Another question we have here is, what has been an aspect of CSTAG effects or implementation that you have not been able to study or are looking forward to examining in the future? So what are future plans really looking at?
We have dozens of things that we want to study. We certainly would like to study the process in more qualitative detail to see how teams make decisions. We need to study the interventions that they use. We know generally that they're doing counseling or they're doing conflict resolution or they're doing mental health services, but we have not gathered the more fine-grained data about the kinds of interventions and the quality of those interventions. That's something we would very much like to study. In terms of the kids with disabilities, we have generally only been told, do they have an IEP or not? Well, we would like to know a lot more about what kind of disability. We have one study years ago that was helpful, but we'd like to study that more. Long-term outcomes, we're gathering some data on that, but we need more on that. We also need to study the kids who've been threatened. How do they feel about the process? We know some kids are worried and distressed by it. Other kids realize it wasn't a big deal and they seem to get over it, but we need to understand that. So lots of things to study yet.
Okay, great. And I think that's about it. We're almost near the top of the hour here. So well, hold on. Yeah, actually, this is an interesting one too. I was just thinking about if someone is actually thinking about Now, the necessity of threat assessment to enable the correct implementation of restorative justice.
Yes.
So do you see any ties with that?
Oh, yeah. We talk about this in the manual. Threat assessment and restorative practices go hand in hand. A lot of our approach, problem-solving approach, recognizing that a student making a threat is probably dealing with frustration over a problem that they are not able to resolve, and the idea that we're going to help them resolve the problem in a more peaceful manner. There's a lot of overlap with restorative practices, and we endorse and encourage schools to use restorative practices. Now, my caveat is that restorative practices are tough. They can be labor intensive. They can be hard to implement. And, I know you've done research on this, Francis, you and your colleagues. But I think the principles and the idea behind restorative practices are very compatible with a threat assessment approach.
Great. So thank you very much, Dr. Cornell, for that presentation. And for the folks who want to learn more about restorative practice, on threat assessment, we'll leave a link on a website of this webinar and maybe some other resources that you can look at the school climate website for ARA. So thank you very much again, Dewey, and we will keep in touch, and thank you for your time. And for those of you who have joined us, thank you very much. And it's exactly 1 p.m. now on Eastern Standard Time. And thank you for joining us today, and we'll hope to see you again at a future webinar as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Francis. Appreciate it.
Thank you.